Last fall, I was fortunate enough to get to take a 2-day lesson with Greg Pennington and make this awesome perch. While there, I fell in love with the chair called the Democratic chair and could not wait to come back and try making it myself. So when I was back in Nashville to visit my best friend Ann Briggs, we asked Greg if we could squeeze in making one. Let me show you the process. It is pretty fascinating. A portion of the chair I made literally came straight from this log. I started the first day off by using a wedge and sledge to split the log into usable sections that I can then use a froe and a mallet to get rectangular pieces of wood that will eventually be turned into my chair's back spindles. It's amazing how easy it is to get a semi-square piece of wood when you understand how to split the wood properly. Greg says that the froe and mallet is the first woodworker's table saw. Once I got 5 spindles out of the log, we moved inside to Greg's shop and sat at the shave force to cut them down to size with a draw knife. This process consists of getting one side flat, almost like what a joiner would accomplish, then flipping it over and getting the opposite face flat to it, much like a thickness planer. While making the 5 spindles, we also shaved what will be the curved back piece. This is my first time steam bending anything, and it was so enthralling. Our piece of wood can be placed in the steam box for about 45 minutes where it fills with moisture, making the green wood malleable, but only temporarily, so we had to move quickly. Greg had the jig with the exact curve and clamps at the ready. We already marked the center of the piece so that once it was in line with the center of the jig, I could squeeze on the clamps and start pulling it into the needed curve. Now, that back curve needed to sit in the clamps for 24 hours, and I also put my size back spindles in the kiln to get their moisture content down. Then I started turning the spindles needed to make up the 4 legs, 3 stretchers, and 2 back posts. These are made from already dried out maple that Greg had, and I'm not a fabulous turner, but the great thing about the Democratic chair is that all of these parts get facets added to them later, so my imperfect shapes turned out looking just fine. Or so I think so. Once all of the parts were turned on the lathe, I went back to the shave horse to start cutting in those facets I mentioned. This is done with a spoke shave, and the process is to set the spindle in to make one side flat, then rotate it 180 and get another side flat. If you watch me make the perch, you'll remember that I did those legs with these facets. It is a subtle thing that gives the finished piece a striking look. The next step is to cut in the tendon on each spindle so that they could be poked into the kiln to ensure the moisture content is going to be low enough for when we assemble the chair in a few days. Another thing I really like about this chair is that a mix of material is what the Democratic chair is all about. A gentleman named Curtis Buchanan designed it to be a chair built out of whatever you have on hand. So far, I've made the spindles from oak, the legs and stretchers from maple, and up next was to start making the seat, which is made from a huge block of pine. I started off by tracing the seat template on the block of pine. Once everything was marked, I could start drilling the holes. This is another part of the process I think is interesting. These holes for the legs are drilled at a compound angle and used to be done using 2 different mirrors. However, Greg invented a system of using 2 lasers instead. And as long as you keep the crossing of the 2 lasers directly on the crosshairs Greg placed on the back of his drill, the hole will come out at the needed angle. The drill bit is like a pre-drill that gets the hole mostly to the size needed. But the next step, which is to ream the hole, gets it to its true size to match the tenon on each one of the legs. It's important to get these 2 to mate up nicely to each other to have a rock-steady chair at the end. This step uses those same lasers to make sure I don't get off the compound angle that's needed. I would have the spindle on hand to test fit every few passes until it came down to the correct depth. After getting one correct, I would repeat on the next and then the next until they were all properly fitted. Next, I got a very special treat of using a hand plane of Greg's that my good friend Jenny Bauer custom engraved all by hand. Whew, that thing is stunning. I quickly went over the back of my pine block to remove any pencil markings and get it nice and flat, so that I could flip it over and start my favorite part of the process, which is carving in the seat. This is a fascinating process for so many reasons. One, the tools feel so cool when they're cutting and taking out scoops. This tool here is called a scorp, and its purpose is to remove the bulk of wood in the seat of a chair. You can see the drastic gouge marks it leaves behind. This is just fine because the next step is to use a more refined cutting tool called a potato. This will still remove wood, but just not as quickly. It's also great at cleaning up the unevenness from the scorp cutting and feathering in the different curves and dips in the seat. Now there will be more refining of the seat later, but after getting it mostly scooped out, next was to take it to the bandsaw and cut out the profile so that I could start on the perimeter profiles. Sticking the seat blank vertically in a bench vise, I first made pencil marks along the top and bottom of the different edges so that I could use a draw knife to cut a chamfer in between. And I wish you guys could feel just how cool this motion feels. This is the end grain of this section, and watch just how smoothly and cleanly this cuts. Besides feeling, it also has this amazing sound to it as it shaves off the cut. It is extremely different than power tools. I know time can get lost in videos, but this is a day's worth of work for me to make that seat, and I just think it's magical. I think it's funny it hits me this way since I make stuff all the time, but it just takes it to a different level of magic to use only hand tools. Okay, next up was to drill some holes in the legs to add in the stretchers. This is a pretty nerve-wracking step, but one great thing about taking a class with Greg is he is there every step of the way with you to make sure you feel comfortable and are having a great time. Now, of course, after I build my chair, I have to fly it back home, so the goal was to only glue up the bottom of the chair so that it could be boxed up and shipped back on the plane. Then go ahead and assemble the top while in Greg's shop, but only do a dry fit so that it could be disassembled and left loose in the box. So, next we assembled. On most furniture, craftsmen use hide glue instead of regular yellow wood glue, and that's because hide glue is reversible. This is useful should a part in the chair ever break and need to be replaced, or if the piece ever needs to be refinished completely. It is much easier to take the whole thing apart to sand than try and do it as a whole. It also has a decent open time to give you time to put all of your parts together and also cleans up nicely with water. We worked piece by piece to assemble the base as a whole. Then once that was complete, we applied glue to the seat holes and attached the base to the seat itself. And then voila! Tell me that's not the neatest thing ever. But we are not done, so let's continue. Next, I added in some wedges to each one of the legs in order to keep them locked into their holes. Then I could cut each leg to length so that it would sit flat. Okay, and that is the seat and lower portion done. Now it was on to assembling the top half, which in my case will just be dry fitted into place for the meantime. We started off by grabbing all of my parts I made on day 1, which we were now on day 3 by the way, and putting the 2 back posts and curved back piece into place so that we could mark off the location the spindles needed to be placed. I first had to drill some holes in the posts, then whittle on the curved back piece so that 1, it was faceted and matched the rest of the chair, but then also 2, had tenons that would fit in the holes I just drilled. This was done over at the shave horse with the draw knife, and then fitted into place. Next was to drill the holes through the curved piece so that next the spindles could start being added. Now I'm typically really adamant about doing everything myself when I'm working on something. However, I was so nervous about possibly breaking this precious part that would take me 2 days to make another if I messed it up that I asked Greg to please drill the holes for me, which of course he was happy to do and did a fabulous job, so that the very last thing I had to do to complete the chair was to fit in the spindles one by one, and then take a seat in the very first chair that I've made. Which you can probably imagine, it's a very rewarding feeling. The next morning, Anne helped me package up my chair so that I could take it home as a checked bag on the plane. I wasted no time when I got home and started assembling it the very next day. I was in a rush on the last day to finish, so before I started putting together the top half, I first went over each one of the spindles on my own shave horse and fine-tuned things just a bit more. Then I followed the instructions Greg sent me home with to do all of the final assembly work, which started off with me gluing in the 2 back posts. Next I cut the curved back piece to length outside of the post. I used a chisel to pop in a curve and then also wedge them into place. Now the spindles. I placed each one into its slot, then applied some hide glue to the top side of each one. This way, as I popped it down into place, glue would be applied to each one of the holes. Once each one was seated properly, I did a general cleanup with water on a brush and paper towel. Then I went to each one individually and popped in a curve with a chisel, then drove in a wedge. After it was firmly in place, I cut each wedge to length, then repeated on the rest. You know, I never thought that I would be into chair making, and truly, I think that my enjoyment of it is a credit to Greg's teaching style and also just environment. So if you are interested in taking a class, I really recommend it. I have taken 2 now, and it's been the highlight of both years. So, of course, I have painted the chair since you've last seen it, and I thought about including that here, but it's such an interesting process that I went ahead and turned that into a standalone video, so be looking for that shortly. I really hope that you enjoyed coming along as I built my first chair, and of course, I've left you links to everything down below, including Greg's class schedule. So, that's it for this one. I will see you on my next project.